In the final push, we are of a national election that happens on May the 29th, next week, Wednesday. Already, voters have begun to cast their ballots. Those that live abroad and some of the special votes will be happening very soon. And the Western Cape, of course, has been under the governance of the Democratic Alliance since 2009. And Premier Alan Winde, the premier candidate for the party, wants to defend his turf, and he now joins us on the line for our premier candidate interviews. Premier, good morning and welcome.
A very good morning to you. Thank you very much. Good to be with you.
I see your flag there, or you're sitting next to a South African flag. Are there any matches close by?
No, this is the second half of the advert.
Okay. Talking about that, what was the thinking behind this advert that has certainly left very many people touched on their studios?
Yeah, of course. I mean, but if you are one of the 27,000 or a family member of one of the 27,000 people that were murdered last year, or if you're one of the youth who can't get a job and we have the highest youth unemployment rate in the world, or if you've been affected by just generally the gender-based violence crime rate, which is of the highest in the world, or I mean, there's so many things that are just failing in our country, and our country is being destroyed. And of course, that was symbolic of it. And then saying, but we can change this. We can actually. This is the most amazing country, and what represents our country, our flag. And so, the first part is our flag is being destroyed, our country is being destroyed, and of course, you can bring about change, and it can be, as I jokingly said, but it can be then the reformation of this amazing country.
Yeah, look, I mean, I don't want to, spend all this time talking about a flag. There are some people that obviously have responses there too, and we're happy to hear what they are on the WhatsApp line 0786 10 11 12. Let's get into it. We're, of course, at the last lap of an election that I'm curious to know how you're feeling about this election. Is the DA, are you a little bit concerned about whether or not you're likely to return to Leeuwenhof?
Well, I mean, I've put my hand up again. I believe that we have a really great track record. I mean, this country is under a lot of pressure, and even under that pressure, I think our track record stands, well ahead of any other province. And we're saying this is what we've done, and we would like to continue doing that and continue building a province where things do get better. And it is, there's a lot of pressure on us, and 150,000 South Africans move here every single year because we believe that we're giving you those options in our province. And so when we look at jobs, and you can see and of course I think everybody's known my position on jobs from the very beginning. That's everything I do, I believe, is about jobs, because our mantra, nothing stops a bullet like a job. Nothing, a job helps you become safer. Nothing puts food on your table like a job. And of course, we have millions of people on social grants, but even the social grant is, doesn't really enable you to live a life of value. And so a job definitely changes your life. And nothing gives you dignity and pride like a job. And I'm very proud of what we've managed to achieve with our programs. And the numbers: 78.9% of all new jobs in South Africa in the last 5 years come from this one province. And even that, I would love it was double the amount of jobs, because we got a 20% unemployment rate, which is way too high. I mean, and when you walk the streets, you see those matriculants who've got past matric and they're still standing on the street. You can feel it, and
Just on that 79, are you saying 79.8% of all new jobs that were created in the last 5 years were created in the Western Cape? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, of net jobs. So if you add the total number of jobs in the last 5 years, new jobs in South Africa, and you add the total number of new jobs in the Western Cape, and you put those two together, 78.9% of them come from this very province.
Okay, but job creation is one of those ebb and flow issues. If you look at the latest the latest employment statistics, the quarterly labor force statistics by Stats SA, it in fact shows a high number of jobs being lost in the last quarter in the Western Cape, whereas KZN, for instance, is the province where the most jobs are being created at this time. And so whether, of course, we rely on a quantum figure of 5 years, which, of course, I've seen other parties also debate and debunk whether that really is representative of a realistic figure. The reality is that, do you believe, or let me put the question then to you rather, that given the statistics of the last quarter and what we've been seeing, up and down from the COVID period, etc., how much of the job creation that is created or the lack thereof is a function of government and a function of a DA government?
Okay, so I mean, no one can dispute the number. It's 302,924 net jobs in South Africa. That's the number of jobs that we increased by in our country in the last 5 years. And of those 302,924 new jobs, 239,150 came from the province. And of course, every quarter, because jobs are seasonal. So our unemployment rate went from 20.3% to 21.4%. So our unemployment rate actually rose quarter on quarter. But we still had 82,000 more jobs in the Western Cape in the last quarter. And of course, every quarter changes because we have a tourism economy, and then we have an agricultural economy, and then we have a tech economy. But tourism and agriculture are both seasonal economies. So of course, jobs will go up and down. But that's why, in crime statistics or in job statistics, you should rather look at a long-term jobs numbers. But we do believe, because I think, let me use one example, the airlift strategy. I was responsible for it. Airlift started 12 years ago. SAA cancelled a direct London to Cape Town flight, which impacted Frankfurt to Cape Town flight because they were in partnership with Lufthansa in the Star Alliance. That was devastating to our economy. So we started the airlift program. We put some money aside and we said, let's attract 4 new direct flights. Let's move on to this last season. It was 215 direct flights from Africa and the world directly into Cape Town every single week. And we had a record number of visitors, 1 million visitors over the holiday season. And we've continued with those records. Now, when you intervene in that way, that is how a government intervenes. If I think about the agri-processing strategy in Project Kulisa, I think about, let's think about the halal food products strategy and how we started to grow our competency in export markets. We took that up to a 10 billion rand export market. Those are interventions. If I think about fintech, and we now rated as fintech, we set up the incubators. Many years ago, we set up those incubators, the Bandwidth Barn, the barn in Khayelitsha, the ICANN Center in Elsie's River. We started the first fintech degree alongside UCT in the Southern Hemisphere. And those were interventions from a government, and those interventions then end up in enabling the economy or cutting red tape. I've been big on red tape to red carpet. Of course, since I moved out of that portfolio, the name's changed now to ease of doing business, and we measure ourselves in different regions of the world as to how we're doing in business enablement, and then interventions for SMMEs. So, for example, the other day I was out at R Labs in Mitchell's Plain and looking at, that's an 85 million rand project where money goes to entrepreneurs to grow their businesses. And it was amazing seeing those businesses, a lady who's a medical doctor out of Bontehevel who has now gone into tech medicine, and to see how this money enables her to grow her business and employ more people. Or a lady in Khayelitsha who was running a whole lot of beauty salons, but she wasn't making any money. She had too many. Luvuyu Rani, who is a well-known entrepreneur, has got an entrepreneurial foundation. We support through funding, supporting entrepreneurs through those platforms that they create. She's consolidated, redesigned her business, and now her business outlets are turning R1 million a month in Khayelitsha on beauty salons. And so those kind of interventions, that's what government does. And then the youth programs like the Year Beyond. I mean, those are programs where those young people who haven't made a decision on studying further or can't find a job, we've got 4,000 on average Year Beyond matriculants who go into these programs. They work in one of our departments, in one of our offices, and almost all of them in that year that they work for us, they then make a decision on a career choice. Most of them want to go and do further studies, and they decide where they want to go to. So these are the kind of interventions that government's put in place, and that's why these numbers end up as to where they end up. And then, of course, you've got to attract investment. And,
yeah, I have different chapters of issues to get through. So let me, and that is definitely noted. Let me go on to talking about, since you highlighted interventions, I want to talk about your crime safety plan. That was a big feature of government and the work that you've been doing in the last 2 to 3 years. Has the plan and the money that you invested in this plan, has it paid off? Has it made Cape Town a safer space?
So I actually haven't got it right yet. I want to do a stadium presentation on when you drop a murder rate in, say, Kraaifontein by 44%, or in Mfuleni by 7%, and you drop those murder rates, how many people's lives does that save? And I want to do that number and then put them in the stadium and say, these are the number of people that are still walking on the streets because of this intervention. We started this intervention because it's not our responsibility. South African Police Service is the responsibility of the national government. I absolutely agree that they're managed at a national level. I believe they should be managed at a local and provincial level. And we will continue fighting for that change. But in the meantime, what should we do? Should we just stand back and say, no, it's not our responsibility. Provinces can only have oversight, because that's what the Constitution says. I say no. I mean, our children are getting shot in the street. Innocent children are sitting in their backyard busy playing, and a stray bullet takes them out, or a young girl standing at the gate of her school and she just gets shot by a stray bullet. That's totally unacceptable. 27,000 murders in our country every single year, and that number just goes up. It increases, generally double digit, not even single digit increases. So then I said, well, what should we be doing differently? And then I said, well, let's go and talk to the best that we can, our international partners and our criminologists in our universities, and we put the safety plan together. It's got 2 legs. It's got the boots on the ground, the 1,300 officers deployed to the places where murder is the highest, not to leafy suburbs or to whatever. It gets deployed to those areas where murder is the highest.
But do you believe it has worked? I mean, you cite Kraaifontein and some of those other areas, which you believe is backed up by the statistics. But equally, if you look at Khayelitsha, parts of Mitchell's Plain, etc., parts of the southern suburbs here in Cape Town, there are still of those policing precincts and certain areas, as how these crime stats are designed, that do show crime being significantly out of control. Parts of the Cape Flats, big parts of the Cape Flats, that crime hasn't demonstratively dropped. There's been these LEAP officers that is funded by Safety Plan and others that have boots on the ground, but they're not quite translating into in the majority of a sense in which we can say Cape Town is a lot more safer. It still holds of the highest murder rates, for instance, in the country, and so I'm wondering whether it was your plan through the safety plan to arrest that, and if so, if that was the case, what evidence is there really to show that crime has fundamentally reduced?
So the evidence is done by the Institute for Security Studies. It's not my data, it's Institute for Security Studies. 5 years ago, Cape Town was the murder capital of South Africa, and they measured the previous 5 years and this last 5 years. So in other words, the term before we put in the safety plan in the province, and then this term with the safety plan in the province. They measured 4 provinces, the Eastern Cape. The Eastern Cape, the murder rate per 100,000 went up from 11 to 13. In Gauteng, the murder rate per 100,000 went from 3 to 13. In KwaZulu-Natal, it went in the previous 5 years from 8 to 16. In the Western Cape, it went from 14 to -1. That is definitely a statistic that shows there's a difference in those murder hotspots. Of course, if you live in one of those hotspots and the murder rate dropped by 7%, you still had 5 people murdered in your street last week. So you go, what difference is that making? The statistics are showing that there's only one place in South Africa that murder came down, and that is where we've intervened with those LEAP officers. Of course, we've got 1,300 officers as opposed to the 17,500 SAPS officers. We're just doing a little bit to show that you can make a difference if you use data, if you use other mechanisms of data capture and identification of hotspot, if you use shot spotter, body cams, eye in the sky, different kinds of training models, it definitely is showing statistically a difference. And the Western Cape now is not the highest murder rate per 100,000 in South Africa. It was 5 years ago. That has changed because in other provinces, murder has just carried on to climb. So absolutely there is a difference and a change. And, you know, what value do you put on one life? And so, of course, I am certain that the data is credible and is showing a difference. I could also say, well, let's stop doing it and let's just let crime carry on. I'm not going to do that. I promise you I'm not going to do that. It is affecting the citizens of this province. I swore, allegiance to the Constitution, and for this, on behalf of the citizens, I must do whatever is possible. And the safety plan, of course, we can tweak it, we can change it, bring in extra things, but it is the biggest difference that has happened in any province in South Africa. So I've got no doubt, and I will stand by it. And, you just have to go and ride along with some of these LEAP officers. Just go and walk door to door in those communities. We've arrested more than 30,000 people now because of those LEAP officers, just the LEAP officer arrests. That definitely is making a difference. Of course, gangsterism out of control, and it's just unacceptable. And quite frankly, SAPS is totally failing the citizens of this province and this country. But this intervention, and the interesting thing is now suddenly we're seeing Gauteng also trying some different interventions because we've started with these interventions. So I've got no doubt. And then, of course, remember, the biggest intervention is violence prevention, because we've got to try and get ahead of it. And that is the unit that was set up last year. It's set up within the health department, and it is actually to try to get ahead of crime. Why do we end up with crime? What are the questions that we've got to ask?
I just want to circle back to, again, your contention that 5 years ago, the situation was a lot more grim to what it is right now. I look at the crime statistics that were released in the more recent ones that were released. This was third quarter crime statistics 2023 and 2024, released in February of 2024. Among the top 5 stations, police stations, where murders were reported, the most are in Nanda in KZN, and Mfuleni, Gugulethu, Nyanga, and Khayelitsha in the Western Cape. 3 out of the 5 places in the country where the most murder stats are reported is in the Western Cape.
Correct. That's correct. That's why I put a safety plan together, because I can't just sit back.
Your contention is that your safety plan is working. Working for who and where?
Well, it is a start. I can't put this up on the screen, but that's the graph from the ISS. Go and have a look at the.
I'm reading a hard stats here from the South African Police Services that give us the details. They give us a sample size: 7,340 murders established that augments and misunderstands provocation. That remains the top casual factor, leading to 1,116 murders. It goes on to say that it's also concerning that 268 gang-related murders. 250 of these numbers are reported in the Western Cape. So out of 200 and nearly 270 gang murders, 250 of them are reported in the Western Cape.
Yes, exactly. That's why we've put a safety plan in place. It is not a constitutional mandate for a province. I should be sitting here when you ask about the crime stats, I should be saying to you, well, it's not our responsibility. It's, Becky Clele and the national government. That's actually what my answer should be to you. There's no ways I'm going to
But you're telling me, but your contention, Premier, is that crime is notably being reduced. And one of the contentions, and I want to maybe then ask you, because we may go back and forth on these issues, but I want to then ask, because I don't have a lot of time, I want to ask you about the contention that's been raised by some that essentially putting together the safety plan and funding of the safety plan had seen you take money from education and elsewhere to fund essentially a plan which, as I'm saying, and I'm putting it to you right now, from not anybody else, the South African Police Service's crime statistics, that 3 out of the 5 police stations across the country that are the most dangerous areas are found in the Western Cape. So are you then, if it's true, can you confirm, are you in the design of the budget taking money from education and elsewhere to put it into a plan which some would say it's not yielding the type of investments that you're making?
So it's only 1%. So, obviously you get a budget. And when most of our budget goes to health and education, because that's where the biggest number, the biggest number of staff members, those are nurses and teachers, the biggest component of our responsibility is health and education, and then followed by social development. That's where it goes. And so, of course, 1%, every rand you take has a consequence across the whole of your budget. But the contention at the same time is that if you look at, say, for example, health, and every time someone is murdered, the impact that that has on your system or in your education space, go to Delft right now and you will see 3 or 4 of our LEAP officers outside a school. Now, in actual fact, if there was no safety plan, those LEAP officers would not be outside the school and the crime would be higher. So I absolutely dispute that. And, quite frankly, when you start to see a reduction in those numbers, of course, it's a start. But and that's the only place in South Africa where you're seeing a reduction is where those are being implemented. And if we took it all away, it would be exponentially worse. And exponentially worse would have a direct impact and cost on education and on health. And of course, we have this debate within our budget system. We have MTech processes where the whole government sits there and says, we're going to divide the budget up accordingly. And I promise you, we have that debate to say, well, should we cancel all safety programs and only just focus on X, Y, and Z? And at the end of the day, you make that decision to say, but putting a safety program in that puts extra fencing around a school, has LEAP officers that actually protect children in those gang areas, it makes a lot more sense. It'll make a lot more sense in our trauma unit in our hospitals. I mean, the deployment of those officers to those murder hotspots doesn't come from police data. It comes from our health data. And our health data, because they deal with the trauma, with a shooting, with a stabbing, with the post-mortem. They've got to deal with that. That data tells us where those crime hotspots are. And you must actually go to those communities and ask them, does it make a difference, yes or no? And of course, when someone gets murdered in the street, you would like it to be 0. And I'm hoping
let me then say, I do go to those communities. We were in those communities last week, and you were in Mitchell's Plain when we had a town hall debate. And in the overwhelming sense, residents were lamenting these LEAP officers that they don't believe are quite effective. Now, I mean, it's doing something rather doing nothing. So there, I will, say that perhaps, there is some sort of headway in that particular regard. But they question, again, the impact of these programs. They talk about things such as shot spotting in our park that they say is able to pinpoint and triangulate where there may have been a sound registered, but it doesn't quite translate into a drop in the senseless levels of violence that we see in those communities. We sit in a place like Mitchell's Plain, in Bonteheuwel, in Hanover Park, in very many of these communities, in which they would fundamentally stand on an opposite block of you right now to say that your safety plan don't seem to be working for them.
30,000 arrests, 600 guns off the street, and many lives saved. But imagine if we were having the opposite conversation now to say, so in the last 5 years, murder has gone out of control, and what have you done about it? And I said, well, nothing, because it's not our competency. I cannot do that. That's why we put a safety plan in place, because
Right.
it is over and above what the South African police services are able to do. We have too few police officers that don't have the allocation. Go and have a look at those exact same places where our LEAP officers are deployed. That has got the highest population to police officer deployment rate. That is really the criminal kind of ANC position, and those very people who are complaining should also be shouting about that, to say, where are our police officers? You know, in those murder hotspots, it's one officer to 800 and one officer to 900 citizens. And I've been shouting about this for years. They don't change it at all. And the average is 1 to 330 or 334 citizens. I mean, it is just totally unacceptable. The SAPS guys are totally.
It absolutely is. Absolutely is. Premier, I want to move on, because there's quite a lot of other areas that I want to get to. Premier Alan Winde is on the line with us. He is the current Premier of the Western Cape, and he quite wants to defend that position as we go to the polls on May the 29th. Housing is another particular concern, and we went to residents in different communities, and Premier, this is what they have to say on the issue of housing.
I know a lot of people that is waiting, that's on the waiting list for housing, for houses, for this government houses, but it's been years, 5, 8, 10 years, they're still waiting. They've been told they've been put on the top of the list, but never got any results. You understand? So at the end of the day, they were told they're at the top of the list, but people that is younger, who's not even been on the list for too long, has gotten their houses first. So I'm not sure if it's about people working there that they know or whatever, but it's not right though.
All right. So that is about housing waiting lists, and maybe you can start off there. I was looking and hearing about, you know, some very big figures in terms of a housing waiting list. Work into the response, please, this question about the housing waiting list. But my actual parting point on this issue is what is the model, according to your understanding of what the provincial government, the role that it plays in the delivery of homes? Are we looking at these sort of RDP, BNG type housing, that is the area in which government plays a role to try and deal with housing? Or is the model at the moment a mixed model of social housing in which there are, you know, expensive bits of units with middle income bits of units, and for the lower tier as well? What is the focus in terms of your government in the last 5 years, and for the next 5 years, if you do come back to power? What is the focus in the delivery of houses, Premier?
Okay, so when you look back at the last 5 years, it's 46,000 housing units, and it is a mix. You know, some of them are straight social housing opportunities. We've got partnership housing opportunities where people contribute a certain amount depending on your salary income. What we've also tried to do now is to try and create different models. So that's the delivery system that we are building, high-rise density in Conradi Park, which is behind Pinelands, which is a very interesting model, and we're replicating that model now in the inner city in Cape Town. We've now trialed a new model out in the Overberg. That is more of a rent-to-own model, because a lot of people are not able to get any kind of credit. So we enable a rental that builds up your credit record, that enables you to then take over a payment process or get payment, because it's about starting almost a bond or a loan. And then, you know, different models. If I think about Mossel Bay and the sort of double-story walk-up units, where we've got, they look pretty similar, but they have different finishings, because one will be a basic social housing unit, but the next one will be someone will contribute towards it. So it will have a more bespoke or individualized finish. You could choose your tiles, etc. And of course, we've got to continually try to innovate, because the biggest problem that we have is that the housing list is not coming down. demand goes up. And of course, demand will go up when you have high rates of unemployment and you also have high migration patterns. As I said, 150,000 people coming to the province. And so the pressure is on. And then we go back to my initial point that, of course, we need to try to bring down the unemployment rate, because as soon as you enable people through jobs, you can actually have more people helping themselves. But it is a very difficult environment to say, well, in 5 years, we're going to, get rid of the 600,000 backlog, because this doesn't happen. It seems to grow exponentially. And we've got a 46,000 delivery track record. We've changed the model slightly. So if you go to, say, PAL, you'll have agri workers that get a component of the housing, elderly and people with disabilities, child-headed households also get looked after. I think that's where some of the anger comes in, where they might see a younger person in a home. But then there's also, and of course, there's people say, oh, young people who come from another province get a house automatically. I've had a number of complaints in the last while about that, and we've gone to investigate it. I haven't come up with any concrete evidence yet. I know it happens. It's almost like you get your house and you rent it out immediately. And that does become a difficulty. There are policies in place to say you can't sell it immediately. That's also debatable. I believe that you should empower people with an asset, that they can use that asset to their own benefit as soon as possible. But yeah, this is a tough environment.
This is, of course, a political party-related interview ahead of the elections, and what it is that the party and US Premier can certainly bring to the citizens of the Western Cape. And again, a reminder to the listeners, we're not just talking about City of Cape Town, talking about the entire province, hence talking about the Overberg, Hermanus, and those sorts of other areas, the Karoo, and so on, that we're reflecting a little bit on as well. When you say we, what is it that you're referring to? Because you have national government that, of course, provides a grant, which you spend that money and allocate it, of course, to the different projects that are available. Then there's, of course, certain collaboration with the City of Cape Town, and you have a bit of HDA and others, which is a national housing development agency that also builds and delivers houses. So these figures that you're giving me, are they figures that is as a result of a DA government, or is it as an example in part of an ANC government grant that comes to the Western Cape?
So obviously it is a partnership across the board. We get a budget from central government, not ANC budget, but it's the South African taxpayers, and that gets divided, and that comes down from a national level. Then province have to make decisions around housing developments and different types. That's the innovation that I'm talking about, or trying new things. And then local government is key. And local government as well also deliver on housing units, but their responsibility is also the bulk services, because you can't just build houses. You've got to put in the roads, you've got to put in the electricity, the street lights, the sewage systems, the water systems. And so it is a collaboration and partnership. And so those 46,000 units are the province's 46,000 units. Then, of course, municipalities also have a top up. And then the new models are how we're trying to get blended with private sector development as well. And that's really what I'm looking forward to going forward. I think that we called it the better living model when we designed it. That's the one at Conradie behind Pinelands. So it is a lot of private sector partnership as well. So subsidy coming from government, but private sector. And can we enable it through, say, making sure that there are local government, piping systems and electricity systems and road systems in place, the infrastructure, maybe provincial land, and then that is enough to give it enough incentive that you can actually come out with an apartment at 600,000 Rand, which then does enable a better entry into a housing opportunity, because we have to massify it. We can't carry on with the number of units being delivered, but the demand keeps on going up. That is not sustainable into the future with a country that only has 0.1% GDP growth rate. That is not a sustainable model. And how do we deliver within that national framework? And then, you don't want to measure yourself against other places, but, are we able to try new things and different things that gives better opportunities to people at a faster rate? And that's why it's got to be in conjunction with growing the economy. We cannot say, well, in our country, we're going to have more and more people on social grants, because social grants are not going to help more and more people into housing units. We've got to have more and more people into jobs, and more people into jobs with new innovative ways of plot and plan, of densification, of higher rise. And if we can get that right, we should be able to start to bring down those numbers. But the real impact is going to be, the correlation between, innovation in housing units and job creation.
What's your, in very quick summary, just on this issue around housing? Why does it seem the Western Cape government or the DA government is so dead set against social housing options for the Tafelberg property? That has been a highly contentious issue that even extends back to Helen Zille as Premier. You've been in and out of court on this particular issue. What's the big deal with handing it over, giving it to some sort of a developer to have houses available for domestic workers, for others that work in that region to live there as well?
Okay, so let's just use 3 provincial properties in that area. You've got Tafelberg, which is quite a small property. You've got the Victoria Hospital Helen Bowden, which is a much bigger property. And then you've got what we call Founders Garden, which is between Artscape and the CTRCC. Founders Garden, we are busy developing 2 tower blocks in the same model as we've done out at Conradie. And so they are quite well advanced in development of housing in the inner city. The Helen Bowden plan was the plan which is in the Sea Point area for thousands of housing opportunities. Unfortunately, that was hijacked and illegally occupied, and it has been illegally occupied now for about 5 years by the very same organization that's making a lot of noise only about one place, which is called Tafelberg. And if you go back 5 years ago, a bit longer, probably 7 years ago, we made a decision to say, let's develop Helen Bowden as a housing opportunity in the inner city. At the same time, what we should be doing is, why don't we do a sale of a property which is also in the same area, where we can actually turn that money into inner city office, because we needed to move our staff out of rented accommodation into our own accommodation, because it made much more economic and financial sense. So we were doing 2 things: housing opportunities in the inner city, and then taking an asset and saying, well, let's get rid of this asset so we can actually own a second asset that actually makes more sense from an office accommodation point of view. But of course, what happened is that was stopped and was sent to court. You know that in actual fact, we've just actually won that court case on an appeal. And prior to the court case on an appeal, we put out for interested and affected parties so that we could take the Tafelberg site now. We've now said, okay, well, we won't develop that or sell that opportunity to build an office block, because we've moved on. And now we've said, let's introduce that with interested and affected parties, so that we can do some housing on that small property called Tafelberg, while we want to do the bigger housing opportunities on the bigger properties. Well, quite frankly, we've now been taken back to court again on appeal on that property, even though we've already said, let's have interested and affected parties on the property. So in actual fact, we're being stopped again because of court processes on that small property. But why don't we just get those same people stopping us to enable us to start develop more houses at the Helen Bowden space? Come on, stop illegally occupying it. Let the courts actually enable us to build exactly what people are asking for, and specifically those organizations who are activists.
I want to pivot very quickly and go to another issue that has frequently come up in our coverage ahead of elections, and that has been the issue around just the hospital that was shut down for reasons that I don't really know and understand. That hospital has not been built, all this time, while communities in Manenberg, Heideveld, don't quite have a primary place of healthcare to go to. What is the delay, and why has that hospital not been rebuilt?
Okay, so if you remember when it was shut down because when we built the Mitchell's Plain Hospital, we had enough money to build the hospital, and there was such demand for the hospital, but we moved the staff from the next hospital that we were to build, which is here for Houston. So the staff moved then, and of course, then from then on, our country has been in a massive financial decline. We haven't managed to get the economy going. Here, Houston rebuild is still in the pipeline. We've already started with the realignment of that property. It's not only a hospital site, it's also a school site. That's also been held up with extortion and also with legal processes. But that is in the pipeline. We've got 2 new hospital builds. Here, Houston is still in the pipeline for rebuild, as well as the rebuild of Telberg, because that is also a very, very old facility. Also, all in that region of the property, but I mean of the city itself, with massive demand and increase. But I mean, since we've been in power, we built those 2 hospitals. The Khayelitsha one, which was completed, it did start before we came to power, but we completed that hospital, and we put the Mitchell's Plain Hospital into the build mode and built it. And so that's obviously the key of Houston. It's got to be built.
But Alan, it's been 10 years. 10 years. How long is your pipeline? It's been 10 years since that hospital has been closed. 10 years without those communities having access to the hospital.
Correct. And of course, we had a big fight, because in the middle of all this, while we got to build a new hospital, we get cut by 1.1 billion rand in India health and education. So it is a difficult environment when you've got 0.1% GDP growth rate and your taxes are not able. To build a hospital, you've also got to put staff in that hospital, and so everything is ready. It's in the pipeline, and that's why we've had to start thinking about different things. We are busy now putting PPPs with the World Bank together, just so we can start doing new hospital designs where we bring private sector partners in. Because there is such demand. But it is in the pipeline. We've got to make sure that we push it, but we've also got to make sure we push it with the funding. You can't not build a hospital if you don't have funding, and you can't put staff in that hospital. But it is in the planning stage. It is you'll see the specialists were appointed a year ago already in the engineering design and the setup of that hospital and the Telberg hospital.
All right, 12 minutes before 9 o'clock. Let's deal with the issue that is, of course, of concern to listeners of Radio 786, the issue around Palestine. Let me start very straight by asking you, Alan, whether you believe, and the Democratic Alliance believes, that at the moment Palestinians are being subjected to a genocide.
Yeah, I mean, it is totally unacceptable, the number of people that are being killed in Gaza. And I mean, I haven't changed my tune. I've been saying that at the end of last year, any big public speech. I made that on the State of the Province address. Totally unacceptable. 35,000 people have lost their lives, and it is just horrendous. And we actually have to make sure that there is a solution found. We need to have peace. We still are convinced that a 2-state solution is the solution. And it's unacceptable that 35,000 citizens have been killed. It is unacceptable, but it's also unacceptable both sides. I mean, and it's unacceptable that 70,000 people have been killed in the Ukraine. It's unacceptable that across the world we have these kinds of things happening in this day and age, where innocent citizens, children, are being murdered. So absolutely, we need to find, and I'm totally on the side of peace. I'm the premier in a province where we have Muslim communities, we have Jewish communities, we have Christian communities, we have a melting pot of various communities. Last year, when this started, I called immediately for a meeting with the Muslim Judicial Council and the Jewish Board of Deputies. I said, guys, we've got to make sure here on the opposite side of the world that we are also managing this situation. I'm the premier for everybody in this province.
All right, but it's not a Muslim issue, so I don't really want to, depend on that. Have you met with the Palestinian ambassador?
No.
But you've met with the Ukrainian ambassador?
Yes.
Have you lit up the legislature that you're the premier of in Palestinian colors?
Have I met with the Israeli ambassador? No. Have I?
No, that wasn't my question. In fact, I don't think you quite even answered my original question, whether there's a genocide. You told me that the loss of life is tragic and that you are concerned about. But have you, according to the sort of very vocal positions that you've taken on Ukraine, and rightfully so, you've not quite sounded that same amount of concern for the loss of life of Palestinians. You've neither, even answered the question about whether you believe this is a genocide, and I'm going to quite press you on that particular issue, because you have an International Court of Justice that hasn't quite entirely yet pronounced on this issue, but they have said that it looks as if though a genocide is being committed, and they called on the Israeli government to show restraint, to allow for the aid to move in, and a whole host of other things. The South African government has gone back for a third time, which the DA hasn't quite come out fully in support of that ICJ application, and so based on that 30,000 Palestinians that have been killed, and the attacks on Rafah, the lack of water that's not being allowed into the area, the lack of aid that's not being allowed into the area, the hospitals that are being attacked, the fuel that's not being allowed in, the starvation that's taking place at the moment, the attacks on Rafah that is happening at this very time. Do you not believe that this meets the criteria of a genocide?
So number one, I mean, you have heard our party come out very strongly in saying we've got to make sure that aid, food, etc., those corridors have to be opened, and that it is absolutely unacceptable that innocent citizens are being killed. On the question of a genocide, and you've just said it, and I cannot wait for the International Criminal Court to make this ruling as to whether it is a genocide or not. And, let's enable that. And, I absolutely stand by the International Criminal Court. I think it is an organization that this world really needs. You started up by talking about Ukraine and Gaza, and it's interesting that it's nice that our country's taken this to the International Criminal Court, but it's interesting how our country spoke about the ICC, the ICJ when we spoke about the Ukraine. You heard our very same country saying this is not a proper court and we need to withdraw from it, and we didn't believe it was the correct court, but now suddenly it is. I still stand by it. I think that the setup of this court was set up at a time when our world needed it, and South Africa played a very prominent role in the setup of that court. Nelson Mandela was very vocal on it. I think Dullah Omar played a very prominent role in the setup of that court, and I really, really do look forward to the outcome of that court. I see the latest position on...
Alan, you're not quite answering the question, Alan. You're not answering the question. My question is, do you believe that there are serious grounds here that identifies Israel as an aggressor that is committing genocide?
So there are grounds, and those grounds are being tested in court.
Okay, and so equally, would you, if Benjamin Netanyahu comes to South Africa with an arrest warrant that is issued for him, will you, as you committed to arrest Putin, will you arrest him or ask your LEAP officers to arrest him?
Absolutely. I will do whatever is necessary to, if he's found guilty, the leader of Hamas, doesn't matter who it is, if that court finds, just as it said about Putin, absolutely, I would do whatever is necessary to make sure that they are arrested.
That the Premier of the Western Cape, Alan Winde, on the line with us. This issue around what many have lamented as the DA's very lukewarm position on the genocide being committed, of course, in Palestine at the moment, is something that some believe could potentially cost you votes at the ballot at the election when people do go and cast their ballots. I'm wondering whether you share, well, not maybe the sentiment, but whether that sentiment concerns you, that there is a very a real perception here at the moment, and I'm using the word perception because I'm certain you feel differently, but there is a very notable perception here that the Democratic Alliance, that previously visited Israel, was pictured with Benjamin Netanyahu, all of these sorts of figures, hasn't really up until now called it a genocide. It came out against the ICJ case being brought by South Africa. The tone changed later. John Steenhuisen that says, one man's freedom fight, one man's genocide is another man's freedom fight. It takes a very pitiful approach to the lived realities of Palestinians at the moment, that for all intents and purposes, the DA is seen as being very pro-Israeli in this regard, and in fact won't recognize not just the legitimacy of Palestinians, but recognize that Palestinians are the ones at the receiving end of a genocide. These sorts of sentiments increasingly suggest that the DA could be politically punished at the polls on this issue. Is that, according to the polling and the researchers and things that you're talking to, is this a concern for the Democratic Alliance?
So, of course, in this province, we have there are 29 parties on the ballot. So, I mean, obviously, people are going to, try and use whatever's possible to, perhaps undermine the governance of this province and undermine my political party. But I cannot, knee-jerk and change a position because of that. I must remain constant. And as I said, that, I might be the premier candidate for the DA, but I'm also the current premier. And I have to make decisions based on what's best for the citizens in this province. You swear allegiance to the Constitution. And so, yeah, I mean, it could have an implication to a voting outcome, but surely, I must continue doing what is right. I must continue doing what is expected of me within the Constitution when I hold this position in the interests of every single citizen in this province. I can't, start chopping and changing because a poll might change. I've got to remain constant, and I believe that, as a political party, the way that we govern in this province, I think all of the data and statistics show that we govern in a far better way than in any other province in South Africa, and I must stick by that. I can't change that. Because suddenly polling is showing a risk here or a risk there. I must remain constant with the manifesto and the promise of more into the future of good governance. You work for 15 years on good governance, and now you receive 100% unqualified audits in all departments, 100% unqualified audits in all entities. No other province can do that. I can't change that. I've got to continue, with the line that we're on. And so, yeah, I mean,
but what if that line is proven to be fundamentally warped, Alan? Apartheid. Israel was apartheid South Africa's last friend. It collaborated with apartheid South Africa to the very end. It refused, much like the rest of the world, to recognize that apartheid was wrong. That apartheid is even practiced, in Palestine, in the West Bank, where there are checkpoints, there are walls, there are armed soldiers. You have people that are randomly being killed, their resources being cut. There's nothing here that cannot come to a description other than to say that there is an oppressed nation and there is an oppressor. And when the DA speaks, and when you yourself, Alan, as premier, speak about these things, you say that, Russia, and you may be right, but you use the language that the brute force that's being committed is the sort of language that you use. You talk about, the fact that, that there's an aggressor here and all of those sorts of things, yet you don't share that same level of energy when I'm not saying this, the community is not saying that, the polling is not saying it, the world is judging Israel for being an oppressive entity that is occupying the Palestinian people and committing genocide at the moment. And for very many voters in South Africa, Ellen, they seem to think that the DA cannot identify that, and equally then raise questions about whether the DA is truly committed to the liberal values that it claims it does have.
No, absolutely. And I'll say it again, that it's unacceptable that this kind of murder and killing of innocent children and citizens, in Gaza it's totally unacceptable. And I'm absolutely on the side of peace. And whether it's there or any other place that this is happening, it is absolutely unacceptable. And I really do get angry about it. Just as I get angry about how our very own citizens are being killed and murdered here because we're not able to deal with it. And that's why I fight so hard about saying we need to get more power over policing, etc. So absolutely. Right. Okay. And, so at the end of the day, I've got to make sure that I can make those comments. And I mean, you talk about apartheid, and apartheid was absolutely wrong and unacceptable. And I've sworn allegiance to the Constitution, and I've put my hand up on behalf of the citizens of this province.
Let me ask you this, the final parting point, Alan. So if we both agree it's wrong, it's unacceptable, it's brutal, apartheid is wrong, or if we agree, not me as in me the person, but if there's a consensus on those very broad definitions of how we would describe what's happening at the moment, the rest of the world, even in Europe, Ireland, Spain, Norway, etc., other countries that cut off ties, the ICC is about to issue arrest warrants. The rest of the world, aside from the United States, are the ones that are beginning to review the relations with Israel. Do you then support the government's stance here that we need to cut ties with Israel and keep those ties cut up until such time there is some degree of sanity and justice that will prevail?
So yeah, I don't know. I've got to think about that, but I do think that I can't wait.
Quite simple, Alan. What is there to think about? Would you support that this country severs if there's going to be a Premier of the Western Cape and a Democratic Alliance government? Would you support your party severing ties with Israel?
No, I don't think so yet. I mean, I would.
Yes. How many more Palestinians must die before we consider it as an option?
No, I think that what we've got to do is we've got to make sure that there is peace brought in the Middle East, as we've got to make sure that there is peace, anywhere else in the world.
Peace on what grounds, Alan? Peace on what grounds? How many more Palestinian land must be taken? How many more Palestinians must be murdered? How many more Palestinians must have the ventilators cut because there is no electricity? How many more Palestinians in the West Bank have to be murdered by purely going to school or going to a hospital, as is the case with what has happened in the West Bank last night? How many more of that has to happen, Alan, before you think it is the time to consider it?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It must stop. It must stop immediately.
All right. Thank you very much, Alan Winde, the Premier of the Western Cape.